Hey, this is Ken at Capital Advantage Tutoring. It's my job to get you past the SIE exam and the 7 exam, 65, 66, all that stuff. So what I've been hearing is showing up is structured notes, barrier and buffer notes on the SIE, which surprises me. Like literally makes me think, no, they're wrong. But more than one person has said it. So I'm going to talk about structured notes and the barrier and buffer notes part of it. And we're going to get into it. The structured note is like a hybrid debt. It's a bond. Okay, you lend the company money and they pay you back later, maybe, hopefully. But it's kind of like it's made to replicate equity usually, or some sort of product, mostly equity. So it's a bond plus some sort of derivative like an option or warrant or right that is going to help it replicate equity. So there are risks with it. They have a maturity date, maybe 4 years, 10 years, sometimes longer. It's not for the regular investor. It's definitely for someone who understands their stuff and a more sophisticated investor who's looking to diversify, add a different product asset to their portfolio, because they are sort of complicated and not everyone understands them. I mean, technically an ETN, if you want to think is structured, but it's a bond, okay, that it's the underlier. It's the interest rate you're going to get, the return you're going to get is based on an individual stock or some sort of asset or an index. A lot of times it's based on indexes. And they won't always pay you the full index. They might be 80%, 90%, 95%, 70% of the return of that index. So if the market goes up 10%, you'll get 8, stuff like that. It doesn't pay you during the life of it. It pays you at maturity. So if you buy a 4-year, structured note based on the S&P 500, you'll buy it, you'll lend them the money, and then hopefully if the index is up, say 20% or 25% over that 4-year period, that's what you get minus some sort of percentage. That's what I mean, you could get the whole thing or they could have a percentage. They can do a lot of different things. And they're what they call principal protected, which means you don't have a lot of downside unless they have what they call buffers. So we're going to get into that. But there's a hard and a soft buffer, which is called the barrier, and what they do. Now, they're very tailored to what you want. Okay. So they're very much tailored to what you're looking for and what kind of return you want. So they also have some things to protect the issuer. So they have a thing, some of them have a thing called an auto callable. Okay. Which means if the index goes up a certain amount, like 100% from where it started, they automatically terminate, call it back, pay you off, like to limit their risk. Okay. So they have some features for there, but here's the features that are for you, and that might be on the SIE. I can't believe it's on the SIE, but I'm not going to think people are lying. I mean, that could be the test questions, but why take that chance? Let's get them all right. Let's get every question right. So there's a hard buffer and then a barrier. So let's start with the hard one. The underlying asset, we're going to use the S&P 500. The underlying asset, 75 of the S&P 500 can drop. So you have a protection of 30% here. If it drops 30%, you still don't lose anything. But once it goes beyond the 30, you lose dollar for dollar past that. So like this says, if the market then drops 50, well, that's 20% past the 30. So you lose 20. If it goes to 60, you lose 30. If it goes to 35, you lose 5. So you don't start losing money until it drops that 30%. And then you lose money as it goes beyond that. That's the buffer. So now we'll go to the barrier one, which is a tougher one. And by the way, since it's more risk, it actually has a higher return. So the buffer have a good return. And the reason you buy these is for, kind of good returns and stuff and just to diversify. But the barrier, since it has more risk overall, will actually have a higher return. They'll offer a higher return or maybe give you a higher percentage of the index. Remember I said you can get 80, 90. Well, maybe the buffer does 80%. This will give like 95% because you're taking on more risk. So here's what happens. The market drops 30%, you're still good. You didn't lose anything. In this case, if it goes down 31%, you lose 31. You lose the whole thing. If it goes down 50%, you lose 50. If it goes down 75%, you lose 75. So once it crosses the barrier, you take on all the losses that happened at all. Whereas the buffer one, if it breaks the buffer, then you just lose what's beyond the buffer. So again, the buffer one, it goes down 30, you go beyond 30, you only lose money what's beyond the buffer. If it's the barrier, you hit the barrier. Once you get past that, then you lose everything. It's almost like you from zero down to wherever it's going. So you lose a lot more. And again, that's riskier, a lot more risk potential. So they're going to give you a better return. The one I just talked about was called the market link, where you put the principal in, and at the end of the 5, 10, 15, 4 years, whatever it is, you're going to get back your principal plus or minus, right? Whatever the market does. If the market's down big, you could lose some, you maybe get nothing. That's a market linked index. So the first one was market linked, where you're going to get your principal is going to go up or down based on what the return does. A market linked income note The principal stays the same. You put 1,000 in, you're going to get 1,000 back. Maybe you could lose money. Remember, if it's down, you could lose, but you're going to get paid every 6 months, every quarter, every year, whatever it is, based on what the S&P 500 or the underlying asset is doing. So this one, you're actually going to get paid during the life of it based on the market return. So your coupon every year will move up and down based on either the asset, the index, or the security that it's tracking. But you're only going to get 1,000 back at the end. Your return is what the market does and your income. Okay, so we have market linked CDs. These are for people who would rather have a CD, but that's not a fixed interest rate, but an interest rate that's tracked to the market, maybe the S&P 500, asset, whatever it is. But these things are FDIC insured. I'm getting blurry. Maybe that's a good thing, right? These are principal FDIC insured, and your principal is guaranteed. So you're doing it if you want a little bit better return than the fixed income CDs. But remember, they are FDIC insured, as opposed to issuer protected notes, which are very similar, but the issuer guarantees principal up to their credit rating, right? So it's not FDIC insured. So if the bank goes bankrupt, then you'll still get your money on the market linked CDs. But in the issuer protected, you are protected up to basically the issuer will protect so you don't lose money, but you're up to, if the issuer goes bankrupt, you lose your money. So you have credit risk, default risk of the bank or the issuer doing it. So you're going to get a little bit better return. So market linked CD is very low return because it's very safe. Issuer protected are still safe, but you have some default risk. So they're actually going to give you a little bit better return, but they're very, very similar to market linked CDs. So why would someone buy these things, right? These structured notes. Here's why. Because since you have an upside cap, right, and you have a downside protection, you have a little more defined return. Okay, so you're buying it. Again, it's diversification. If you're looking for a specific target return, this can help because you'll probably fall in in the range all the time because you don't really have a lot of downside risk unless it goes really bad. But you have what they're going to do is they're going to cap some of the upside, so you'll fall within the range. That's a good thing. Okay, so the cap part isn't good, but knowing where you're going to fall within a reasonable variance, totally cool. And that's what people want. I mean, these things can even be leveraged, right? So they can actually have it leveraged where it's earning 2 times or 3 times or whatever the index, or maybe 1.5 times the index with the principal protection on the downside. So there's a lot of upside where you can actually do better than returns without a lot of risk. So you can get, if you're taking the test, that could definitely be a question. When you see a question about downside protection, not losing money, look for something referring to linked notes. Linked notes somewhere would be a structured product that would do this. I'm giving it for everything, but I'm also tailoring it towards your exams. So what are the cons of owning one of these structured notes? We have credit risk, that's default risk, that the issuer goes bankrupt. Market risk, the market goes down. Now remember something, for the most part, you have to breach the barrier or the buffer to start losing money. But in 2008, I think 2000, 2007, 2008, which is really bad, 85% of these things breached the barrier. So just keep that in mind. They're not liquid. You can't really, they're kind of difficult to analyze and classify only because everyone's different, right? So you can't compare one to the other, and that because there's a problem. You have call risk that the issuer can call it back, or prepayment, same thing with the issuer calls it back. The cost is a lot of cost. The commissions on this are much higher than regular products. The taxes are very complicated, right? So you have to make sure you talk to a tax professional before you buy this stuff. And due diligence is basically thinking that it's hard to look at. Again, it's hard to analyze them because everyone is different. So your job is to make sure you do the due diligence on the taxes, the costs, the illiquidity, all that stuff before you buy these. You really can't just, shouldn't be for normal retail investors. It should absolutely be for more sophisticated, accredited maybe. They don't have to be accredited, but more sophisticated investors who can understand risk. Okay, so that's structured notes. Remember, you buy them, they have upside, but they maybe have a limited upside. They definitely have a limited downside to a point. They have a defined, like you can get it, you buy them to have like a pretty defined outcome. There are risks just like any kind of bond, and there's different types, and they can be tailored to specific needs, which is great. Okay, thank you very much. If you like what I'm doing, before I die. Okay, if you like what I'm doing, hit like, subscribe, and share this shit. And every Tuesday and Thursday night, I do a Q&A on the Tube of You, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you there.